I'm a little bit giddy. Thank you, recording in progress. I am feeling a little bit giddy tonight because this is something that I've been looking forward to for a long time, frankly. Shante and I have been, and I'm going to invite Shante to say whatever is on their mind, but we've been dreaming of this for a while now, and we weren't super explicit in the listing of the program, but this is really the heart and soul of this 8-week program is Shambhala teachings, to be honest, and even specific to that, the heart of warriorship. And even more specific to that, the art of being human, which is many people know as level 1. So in some ways, if you're familiar with that program, if you've been through that program, as some of you I know here have been, welcome back. And if you have not been through that program, the only thing I'll say right now is that, these teachings were often presented in a retreat format. So often over the course of a Friday night, Saturday, and sometimes Sunday retreat, whether it be residential or at an urban Shambhala center. And so hearing these teachings was often happened in the context of humans gathering together. And walking in on the Friday evening. So for those of us who are on the Eastern time zone, right, it's 7 p.m. right now. And so imagining ourselves walking in after a day of work and looking around the meditation hall and I know that person, oh God, that person's here. And, what's this teacher going to be like? And all of the things that come up when we are entering into something. And we're going to be talking a lot about that, particularly tonight, but really over the course of these 8 weeks, as we take good time to unfold the teachings, the Shambhala teachings, as they relate to basic goodness, as they relate to working with our hearts and minds. And so Shante and I have been really talking about how to, in some sense, continue to propagate in this day and age with everything that's happened. And I'll refer a little bit to that later, but everything that's happened in the world, in Shambhala, and how we gather now, how do we keep these teachings alive? How do we keep them fresh? How do we continue, even just for ourselves, to take them in, to soak them in, to contemplate and practice them? And so that's the spirit of what this series represents. And Shante, I'll just see if you have anything to say by welcoming folks and your inspiration.
Well, thank you so much, David. And thank you, Jennifer, for hosting. And thank you all for being here. And I have to say, yeah, very tender and choked up to be doing this. And I just rushed home from work. I didn't know if I was going to be able to make it live. So it's nice to be able to sit here and to sit at Dave and to learn from him and to teach with him throughout the series. So I guess what I want to say is that I feel very strongly that the wisdom that is available in the ways that I was trained and David was trained is still very important, and that it belongs to all of us. It doesn't belong to an organization. It doesn't belong to a family lineage. It belongs to whoever feels connected. And, my teachers, Lama Rod Owens and Lama Justin Van Bridges, gave me kind of a dictate a couple of years ago that I was to continue to propagate the Shambhala teachings. And I was like, I'm not interested in that. I mean, I was, but it just didn't seem like a good timing. And David will talk more about the collapse of the Shambhala organization. But as I continue to practice and study and teach, I come back to the truth and the power of these teachings. And hopefully they can be presented, they will be presented in a way by us that's um, um, interactive, relatively safe, kind, and open. So I'm looking forward to studying and practicing with all of you. And David, please teach us.
Thank you, Shante. So friends, we're going to launch in. The one thing that I would say, Michelle and Yasmin, if you want to just, if you wanted to pop in and just say hi, I was thinking earlier today, you know, it's like those things where they're verifying if you're not a robot, you know, and you have to press on the ladders or the boats or something like that. So just there, yes, human, yes, lovely human, so good to see you. And what I want to say is this is really kind of a high, and there's Michelle. Thank you for being here. Thanks so much for popping in. So that's it. I figured that if we can open and close with kind of seeing folks, that might be a nice sense of container. During the course of this class, if you feel that you do want to turn off your video, if you feel that you need to change your posture, right? So that you're like, your back is killing you and you really just need to lie down, and that's going to be how you hear best, or some other postural adjustment, I want to encourage you to do that. I want to encourage you really to make yourself feel comfortable during this class so that you can hear. This is an evening and series about transmitting teachings, and so how you hear best, and often, and we'll talk through this series about, you know, how posture relates to that, but certainly being able to be in an upright posture in a relatively safe place, in a place where that you can hear the best is an ideal situation, not just for this class, but for all of our classes that are going forward. So just wanted to share that. We're going to engage in some meditation. So getting really basic, you know, there are three sort of general methodologies of meditation. There is concentration meditation, which shamatha or breath meditation would fall under that category. There is contemplation meditation, which we're going to do a little bit to get into this class soon. And thirdly, a visualization meditation, which then can be extended to ascending meditation as a next step from the visualization, but, you know, specific, more prescribed visualizations, as opposed to contemplation, which allows you to and encourages us to follow our imagination and follow our mind where it might lead us tonight. And so our meditation this evening is going to be a contemplation practice. And I'm going to present to you three questions. And some of you have heard these three questions of mine. They're not mine per se, but it's something that I use in almost every environment, whether it's a Dharma teaching, whether it's more secular mindfulness, even in more professional environments. I use these questions every day, folks. Like, I use them when I wake up. I use them when I'm on a walk, and it just occurs to me to check in. They are often my entree into a sense of awareness. And they are reminders. These three questions serve as reminders to me to come back, to even know that presence is possible, to be here, and to reconnect with ourselves, with myself. So as I lead us through these three questions, I'll talk a little bit about the first one before I lead it, which is to say that usually how I use these questions is quite brief, right? So it's only about a minute or so. Sometimes shorter, sometimes it's a little longer. We'll do it a little bit longer tonight, but it can be condensed into a seed syllable answer for each one of the questions so that I'm just touching one aspect of many possible aspects of how I could answer this question. So for example, the first question is, where am I? So simple, so basic, and so often I'm delightfully and horrified to find out that I am so far away in my mind from where I actually am that that it kind of, like it gives me pause to realize, oh my gosh, that question is so provocative because it's so close and yet I'm so far. And the question of where am I, as with all the questions, can be applied on many different levels. So as I ask you to reflect on it in a moment, it can be really concrete, right? It can be, I'm sitting, I can feel where I am is my butt on this cushion or in this chair. Like I'm in this chair, I'm in this room, I'm in this car, if that's where you're listening to this right now. Right? So I'm within these four walls, but outside those four walls, right, there's a place. And that place has a particular environment, it has a particular quality. So where am I could be, I'm in the middle of a rainstorm. Where am I? I'm in fall, autumn. Where am I? I'm on unceded land of the Shawnee and the Cherokee peoples, right? Like feeling into, because I'm new to Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky. So that's where I am, but I don't know the history so well. So I can be very concrete. I'm not imagining sitting on this cushion, but I might imagine the history of this land before I was here and before people that I look like were here as well. So sometimes we're very quick to say where we are or what this ancestral homeland is or what this place is, but this is an opportunity to sit back a little bit and feel into that. Where am I? And guess what? Sometimes the answer is, I'm not sure. But we start with the question. So whether you want to engage with this eyes closed or eyes open, starting with just that dropping in process that I know so many of you are really familiar with or getting familiar with, like, right? So turning towards inside. A couple breaths are, they're just there. They drop in. Or we invite them a little bit more deeply in, so we make some room for a few breaths. And that right there on that onset, we can layer in this question, where am I? So ask yourself that question, where am I right now? See what arises with the answer. No right answer. Where am I? And you can answer it 2 or 3 or 4 different ways. So if you have one answer, do you have a few more? Where am I? Could be very concrete and specific, could be more abstract and extending out to the space around you. Where am I? Maybe having some felt sense of how the body settles a little bit as the mind begins to synchronize with, oh yeah, body here. My mind is attending to something here and now in this contemplation, so that a little settling might be possible. And with that, we move right into the second question. We transition to how am I? We're going to start first with physical. So checking in just with the physical level of that question, how am I doing? And again, there's no one right answer. So you might go to just noticing a body part, or noticing generally how the body feels, if you're carrying tension, if there's some discomfort, or maybe some freedom and opening. How am I in the body right now? Again, maybe there's 2 or 3 different answers. And you can ask specific body parts, how are you breath and breathing? Or how are you belly? Which often naturally segues to how am I doing feeling wise? So the body tips us off to feeling or emotion. Even if we don't find it in the body, noticing a heaviness or a lightness, a tinge of sadness, maybe anticipation or nervousness, irritation. We start to get honest a little bit. How am I feeling? How am I feeling? If that question is too much, a little trick is to come back to the where am I? Oh yeah, I'm in this room. So maybe we've noticed 1, 2, or 3 different facets. We again get ready to transition. So we're arriving in these gentle waves. This last question is a little bit of like lifting the gaze in our internal, in our mind's eye of, question is, why am I here? Am I here tonight? A lot of places all of us could be. So this why question, and again, it might just be one thing, one simple thing. It might be just a quality. Like, I want to learn to slow down a bit. You know, I'm looking for patience or peace or insight. Could be very personal to us, but then the motivation also might be connected to how we show up in our lives. I want to be that much more present. I want to understand how to be with people. So, what is it for you tonight? Again, honestly, and you may not know, and just saying that, I'm not sure why, but at least I admit that. So, why am I here? Why am I here? Breathing into a sense of knowing a response or not knowing one. I'm just taking a few more moments with that question again, coming back to your seat if that's helpful. Just feeling any kind of inspiration or yearning for inspiration that's happening. And when it feels right, returning to a few good breaths, just like we started. A few simple breaths. If your eyes are closed, just entertaining the notion that at some point soon you may very gently open them with a special attention to a kind of presence that you've cultivated in this brief period of practice. Feeling that with your eyes, with your skin, with your breathing. So just it feels helpful maybe if a few folks would, and Jennifer, um, maybe actually we'll spotlight me in a second, but maybe take that spotlight off. And if if a few folks would be willing to just give a noticing, offer a noticing from that contemplation, like something that you noticed about anything about it that surprised you, that was mundane, that brought you further in, that gave you pause or is a question that you had. We're not going to have everyone report out, but it might be nice to hear from a few people, just one thing you noticed. And I know you're all super shy people in your real life. I get it. I get it.
I noticed that I had different feelings. So that like right now I have some things going on that create a lot of anxiety, but I also kind of had aspects of my day that were really kind of pleasurable and joyful. So that it was I kind of noticed both of those qualities.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, appreciate the complexity of your experience.
I noticed that in a weird way, there's this expectation, the sort of how am I feeling and why am I here, that invites more subtlety. But I was surprised at how much nuance there was in the where am I question. And it was surprising to me because I had this sense of being home, but also being a really long way from home. I guess similar to what you're saying about containing that complexity and those contradictions.
Mm-hmm.
But I really had this visceral sense of being a long way from home, even though I'm at home.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Ainsley. Really nicely articulated. Anybody else want to share? Is that sparking anybody in your own experience?
I think just what you mentioned about the gentle waves of awareness, sort of, I felt my body really just moving with that. You mentioned honesty of having an opportunity at the end of the day just to look, see what comes up. There was a warmth to that was very nice.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I mean, and I like that word warmth, the sort of warmth concomitant with honesty, right? That there's a gentle way of arriving, and that is gentle, not in terms of shying away from what's there, but a kind of acknowledgement that doesn't come along with often the browbeating that many of us do to ourselves all day long. And so these questions are meant to evoke complexity in some way, and even honor it, honor that it's there. And that's why I say it to me, I use them so frequently that they occur to me at sort of seemingly random times. And one of the ways in which they help me to tune in is that they can just say like, oh yeah, there's so much going on here. I don't even know all the things, but I know that there's a lot, and I want to just honor that, because that is in the hubbub and in the cultural sort of like context, is just, no one wants to hear that. No one's about complexity, right? Like it's this or it's that. So this invites that. And it's also what you all are bringing up, a really sort of wonderful segue into what I want to share with you by way of these teachings. Shante, I would like to credit where credit is due, and certainly the credit goes to Shante for the title of this course, Encountering Basic Goodness. Shante presented it to me, and I thought it was like perfect. And I've been contemplating the notion of encountering basic goodness, because I think it's actually, I think we're going to unpack this the whole 8-week series, Shante. And one of the inspirations for this course, based on that level 1 that I was mentioning earlier, that initial program in the Shambhala training, is that, basic goodness is something that we can all hear about over and over and over and over again. There's no way, we can't surf it on this. We can't become oversatiated. And, you know, I've actually, some of you I know pretty well, and we've had conversations, right, about as we practice, we get to the point where it's like, oh man, I didn't even freaking know. I had no idea what I was doing, what I was getting myself into. Basic goodness, I heard that and just like, I thought I had some clue of what it meant, and wow, it's so different. It's so different than that. And so that's a wonderful revelation. It's a wonderful outgrowth of practice, but it also means like we lean into encounter. That word holds in it, I think, a little bit of an interesting thing to contemplate, which is that it seems to beckon us into a space, right? A common space that we're inside. We are sharing a practice space and a learning space right now. But counter or contra means we are not the same. And that can happen interpersonally. That can happen even within our own hearts and our own minds and our own psyches, right? Like then we encounter, we're coming up against something that's not particularly familiar, and we're seeing something that's like, oh man, right? I don't like that. I inherited that from my family of origin. That's neurotic. That's my downfall. Or that's the thing that I get hooked by. So all of a sudden we're in the space of like a certain relationality, either within ourselves or more broadly as a group of humans. The Shambhala teachings, the reason that I was so drawn to the Shambhala teachings was because they were as much about individual self-realization as they were about societal realization and societal relationality. So these are ancient teachings. Many of you have heard that, right? They go back to the days of the Buddha. They've been preserved in the Tibetan Buddhist lineage. And there are different streams of the Shambhala teachings. So most of us are familiar with the stream that emanated from the Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And specifically in 1974 and 1975, there was this kind of reception by way of, I always like to think of it as an inspired artist, because so many of us can relate to an artist, whether it's a writer or it's a painter who we know, a poet who sits down and something comes through that pen or that brush that is much bigger than they are. And they channel it and they discover it within their heart, within their imagination, and then they express it. And sometimes it's like really angsty, it's like really birthed, and sometimes it flows, and sometimes it's like a flash of lightning. And I wasn't in the room. I've heard the stories for the Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche when these were coming through him, these Shambhala teachings. But I imagine there was some quality of many of those different kind of complex experiences, as you all were speaking about earlier. And so teachings for our time that are also rooted in addressing teachings for society at any given point in history, right? The Buddha went into a room with a monarch, with a ruler of the day, and said, here are the teachings for someone who is in the world. And so that was like, when I heard that, and when I saw the symbolism of Shambhala, and when I was in the Shambhala spaces, I said, that's what speaks to me. Because I want to wake up with a group of people. And I came back to retreats and classes because of the other humans that I met, and because of the teachings, and because of the artwork, and because of the symbology, and because of the stuff that I didn't understand about that was on the altar and the shrine, and because of the flower arrangements, and because of so many different things that were compelling to me. It felt like the teachings were coming from all these different angles. And meanwhile, there was a recapitulation, there was a reoccurrence of the same foibles and problems and downfalls and harms and all the things that I had experienced in other parts of my life. I wasn't leaving that behind when I went into a Shambhala center. And, you know, from my position, from this identity, from the skin and the privilege and the maleness and the able-bodied and the financial privilege that I walk through the world, Shambhala was not necessarily a very threatening place, right? It was familiar. And over time, as I begin to really like feel the contours of that familiarity, and there was this sinking feeling or this sickening feeling that culminated in not just the reports, but the evidence and the stories and the witnessing and the people coming forward saying harm, perpetration of aggression and violence and misconduct that was both acute in specific situations of sexual misconduct, but also was chronic and systemic, and was being named, but wasn't being heard. And so all of that came to this crescendo moment where it was like disabused of this notion that there is this place where we are not in relationship with each other. That all of a sudden all differences disappear and histories disappear and ancestry disappears and genealogy disappears and systemic abuses, ways in which some people are lifted and some people are oppressed, right? How do I reckon with that Shambhala alongside the brilliance of the teachings, the ways in which my heart opened up to hearing the teachings, the ways in which when I read the teachings, when I listened to the teachings, when I discussed them, when I let them in, there was something that was felt true and made real sense to me. So this is the encounter that all of us are in. We are in the space of countering each other. And sometimes that tension is kind of low level, like it's actually kind of stimulating. And sometimes that tension is outright destructive and harmful. And people are kicked out of the space of encounter against one's own will, just completely sideswiped out of encounter. All of this in the context of basic goodness, folks. Basic goodness. There is the notion of basic is that it doesn't have a counter. Right? It is so ordinary in its non-counteredness that the beginningless quality is something that we are invited into with those gentle waves like Rob was referring to, right? That's why we do those three questions, because we gently come into this notion that the way we measure time and space and other human beings and natural resources and the animal world, like the way we're constantly measuring worth and value and this is here and that's there and here's how I can fit all this stuff in a box. Along comes basic and says, whoosh, those conditions don't apply anymore in the realm of basic goodness. So here we are in counter, in a space of opposites and rubbing and tension, and yet we are being held by goodness. Not goodness as opposed to badness, of course. Things as they are. How do we hold something like COVID in the space of things as they are before we've made a decision about it, before we have a judgment or idea of which we absolutely need judgment and idea? We absolutely need to react. How do we come into that encounter space where we need to be able to be in tension, in a sort of relationship of tension with other beings? How do we start from a place of a shared fabric, a shared DNA of all things, as things come into form and they dissolve from form, that there's something that runs through all of that that is incontrovertible. Goodness. I was thinking, Shantae, I was thinking of you, and I was thinking of Ness. Ness. Right? There's, what was the other one I was thinking of? Like, it's not coming to mind right now, but Ness, goodness. Because it doesn't stay fixed. It's not fixed in the good. Good is really easy we get seduced into fixing good as good. But then ness it out, ness it right out. Whatever you fixing in good, ness it right out. Ness that shit, ness. We're going to come back, folks, as I said, again and again, to basic goodness. But in this space of encounter, in this space of gathering the mind, which is really where we are, in such an appropriate place to be at the beginning of this series, in order to encounter, in order to meet each other in that, we have to go get ourselves. That's something that Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams often says, is go get yourself. Go get yourself. Gathering the mind is, think about, it's like, okay, there's the mind, but think about if you, a family reunion or a friend reunion, think about how damn hard it is to get all those people in the same place, even the same Zoom room. Gathering the people like that, there's an intention there that has to be set. The why of why you're going to gather the people is strong and has to be strong, because otherwise you're not going to put the work into gathering the people. Trust me, it's too damn hard. And so gathering the mind sounds nice, but go get yourself. Like, I imagine, being deep in the interwebs. Go get yourself from wherever you are in the internet 3 hours later, deep in the recesses of some store, of some long chain, blog chain, of some, wherever you are. And that experience of being like, oh my God, I'm so deep in that. And I had no idea. I had no idea that much time went by. That's not new with the interwebs. People have been experiencing that, you know, throughout time. We go deep into some place, and without hearing the teachings of like what it means to go get yourself and come back, we can stay out there for a long time, months and weeks and years, friends. And some of us have had that experience. And then when we finally have to go get ourselves, wow, it's a thing. It is a thing, and it's not easy to do. And sometimes we're like, oh shit, again? Again, I gotta go get myself? This process, like the 3 questions, has its own pacing. It has its own rhythm. And I really want to impart that to you all, that if there's one thing that I've gotten out of 20 years of practice, is this notion that that happens on its own time. And I attend to it, I show up for it. But I spent a lot of years like forcing myself to get to, you know, to like become gathered. You know, early on, I was the kind of practitioner who was like, gather, whoosh, you know, smash it in and then sit down on the cushion and do a really good job with meditating. And I've come to respect a lot the rhythm, the pacing, the gentleness, the specificity, the honesty that requires. And I want to share. I'm also a Dharma nerd, as Shantae. That's really why Shantae and I like each other, because we're Dharma nerds. And I'm the bigger Dharma nerd because I don't know if you remember you seeing this, Shantae. I think I've shown this to you, but this is my concentric circles of gathering the mind. So this teaching is a teaching that Sakyong Mipam Rinpoche presented, of whom I was alluding to, if that wasn't clear earlier, with the allegations and the credible reports of sexual misconduct, right? Sakyong was very much involved in that. Sakyong is also my heart teacher. And someone that I've learned a tremendous and great deal from, and am not actively studying with at the moment, right? But this is a teaching that came through, was first published in Turning the Mind into an Ally. And these concentric circles are really, I think it's a helpful tool in terms of beginning to further understand this notion of the breathing in and breathing out. That is the gathering the mind process, right? So you all are not going to be able to necessarily see the specificity of the circle, but on the outer rim of this, right, as the Sakyong writes, is like sometimes it just starts with like, contemplate your life, you know, contemplation. What is your life? What do you like? What do you not like? What are you dealing with right now? What's going on in my life? What arguments am I in? What heartbreak is going on with me? Like, that's a meditation, is just to bring that to the cushion, like bring the fullness of our experience to the cushion, right? Because if we're trying to like hammer in the shamatha into all of that, that's what it's going to feel like. We're hammering or chipping away or chiseling away in our practice. And so this helps a little bit to fertilize and kind of till the soil, so that practice actually can take root, right? Rather than it being trying to plant a seed on a rock, as Sakyong says in that book. Shamatha, we're going to go much more into shamatha in this class over the 8 weeks, but peaceful abiding, or sometimes calm abiding. For the purposes of this, I want to just mention this notion of like, that's the point at which we say, okay, this awareness, this mindfulness awareness, right? Like I've heard the instructions of mindfulness awareness so that, yes, I've identified all of this stuff that's going on in my life, but I'm going to engage practice around it. Like practice is going to meet my life. And that's kind of like between this outer circle, the black circle and the brown circle is, it says here, tuning into the vibration of our mind. So we do that. What shamatha does is it helps us to encounter, right, that vibration. Vibration might be happening really at a high frequency. It might be a lower frequency. It might be somewhere in between. But until you begin to, until it's an encounter situation where we are encountering ourselves, we're encountering that frequency of vibration, we will just think that we're doing the practice. Right? I'm going to do this thing. And that is that's a very conventional approach to so many things in our world. I'm going to do the practice. I'm going to do the workout. I'm going to do the health routine. I'm going to do. And it leaves out the nuance. As you all were saying at the very beginning of the class, it disregards the complexity of our experience, which is actually the richness of shamatha. So the encounter is the encounter of that vibration. And until we encounter that vibration, it's not as possible to imagine what is in the middle of this circle, which is the calm abiding in a mind that is clear, stable, and knowing. Folks, this is the mind of basic goodness. This is the DNA that runs through all sentience. Is a mind that is stable, clear, and has the capacity to know or appreciate. And that's unwavering. It's primordial. It's non-conditional. It doesn't mean that our life isn't happening and getting batshit crazy. It just means that when we can begin to tune into that, then the center point is like, oh, okay, turn this horizontal. Imagine a pond, completely still pond, totally clear. You can see the bottom perfectly. It's totally stable. It's a mountain pond. One drop of a thought into the middle of that ripples out all the way to the edges of the pond. And often by the time it's gotten out to the edges of the pond, it is what we see here in this green circle, right? It's intense emotion. One thought results in very strong emotions. It's the source of emotions. So as we tune into the vibration, the frequency here, then we can start to, as we're doing our shamatha practice, as we're doing our coming back to the object of meditation, the breath, we can begin to say, oh man, I am either in a full-blown fantasy or I'm having some really strong emotions right now. It's possible to know that from here and from out here. No difference. No difference. Different things happening at the different concentric circles. And it goes in from there. Discursive thoughts, right? So thoughts that have that pulse, that wow, 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 wow. Come back to the breath. Then it just wow, 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 rebounds back at us. Okay, so the discursive thoughts, or they're like, it's a tape loop, and we find a breath, and then we come and find another breath, and maybe two consecutive breaths coming into more subtle thoughts. So the pond begins to settle naturally through whatever means happens that day, you know, whether it's the steadiness of your breath or just, you know, just happens to be where your mind is. That clarity and stability naturally emerges. It's not like you did something special. You engaged the technique. And today it's subtle thoughts. Yesterday it was like intense emotions. There's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason, unfortunately, right? But as we engage the practice, we become more familiar. Shamatha is about familiarity in that space of encountering ourselves. so that the seeming binaries of like the fact that I'm super pissed at my son for staying up till 1 o'clock in the morning watching the NFL and not getting a good night's sleep, right? Like that. Oh my God, how did I get so triggered by that, right? Well, I love him. I want him to get a good night's sleep. I also am not a big fan of the NFL. So, but you know, I can encounter I encounter him and I encounter my space and myself in a space, in a contained space. It's not just a free for all with no borders. And that's, I guess, you know, really what I want to communicate by way of this notion of gathering the mind or encountering ourselves is this idea that the result of that is that we can genuinely meet. We can meet ourselves and we can meet others. And when I say to meet someone, it's to come into presence with them. To come into a presence with them. I was having a conversation earlier today with someone dear to me, and we were talking about actually anti-oppression and anti-racism work, particularly for white-bodied folks. And one of the things that this person was talking about is being in the context of that training and having, you know, being online in a training and like having, you know, so co-facilitated by a black-bodied person and white-bodied person. And, you know, white people coming in, and this is a space, you know, specifically for white people, coming in with a question or something to say, like, I want to say this thing. And my friend was saying, you know what, half the time they get cut off because it's not the content of the question. It's the energy of the presence. And that's what the facilitators and the teachers are doing time and time again, is pointing to, but what is the energy of the presence? Can you feel what's going on? Even before you start talking about whatever question you have or whatever you want to say, can you feel what's going on in your body? Because guess what? I can, that facilitator, I can feel it. I'm not even in the same room as you. So, encounter so that we meet each other in the space of presence. And, you know, until we begin to, I mean, this goes back maybe, you know, as a summation, this goes back to this notion of the teachings of basic goodness and the Shambhala teachings, how we encounter each other. Sometimes we hear the word enlightened society, right? That phrase. How am I encountering myself and the other? That living into the sense of what is the energy of that? What is the presence of that? What do we carry into each one of those encounters may be some sense of the on-ramp for enlightened society. And until that becomes like part of the culture that we share, that we practice in you know, from these different identity locations, right? There's so many different levels and layers and intersections of that. But until that's the gist of it, feeling each other in that encounter, do we have a shot at enlightened society? Like, And so back comes the ness. What's your ness? People can feel your ness from farther than you realize. And so encounter ourselves, encounter each other. And when we do that, when we gather, now let's talk about basic goodness. Now let's talk about the fact that you and I are not experiencing this from the same point of view. And we can have that conversation without people getting their undies in a bunch. Yeah, the last thing I'll say before I open it up to see if you all have any things that you want to share, questions or comments, is this notion of meeting. When I was thinking about it today, do you know that here's what's really visceral about it? Like, do you know that experience? I've had that experience where you come home, come back to your apartment, come back to your home, and you say to that friend or that loved one, I met somebody today. I met somebody today. And maybe it was like I fell in love with, the person who served me coffee. Maybe it was that there was someone at school that shared an idea that I had. Maybe it was like a friend had a friend who they brought along with them. And I was like, we have so much in common, or I'm so drawn to you. I'm so connected. Right. So this is encounter. And sometimes it's, maybe it's not so like pleasant. Maybe that encounter actually is quite intense and rubs us the wrong way. But in either case, we're never outside the space of encounter, with that caveat of unless we get kicked out, which does sometimes happen. But otherwise, we are encountering all the time, folks. And I really, I'm so honored to be able to be in this encounter with you all. So I want to just see if you have any thoughts or anything to add into this mix. This Zoomlandia is often not the easiest to warm into encounter. And that's why I was early in invoking, being often when this is shared, it is shared in a common space. And so I want to just invite you, because each one of you is helping to make the space of this encounter right now. And so whatever you are reflecting on, even if it's not fully formed, is welcome. It enriches our encounter.
Yeah, hi. I have a quick question, observation. Thank you so much for the talk this evening. Can you speak a little bit to insight? When you're in that state of calm abiding, it's often spoken of having insight into situations. Can you speak a little bit to that, please?
Yeah. Thank you, Jeffrey. My intention was to allude to it a little bit in naming, and there was a lot that was said, but naming the qualities, the inherent or innate qualities of the mind as being, innately stable, innately clear, and innately capable of appreciation. And so stability, sometimes talked about as strength, also sub-themes of this course, right, is like that we are working with a mind that is stable, clear, knowing, capable of appreciation. And that what you're saying is actually not separate from shamatha, right? It's not separate from that inner circle. And sometimes it is referred to as a rising out of the space of shamatha. And I think that can be helpful by way of encountering what insight is in our life. But it's actually inseparable, because we started with insight, or we started with the capacity for insight. And so to me, those are somewhat synonymous. Now, sometimes insight, particularly what I find in our world, in our cultural context, is it's like it's sometimes akin to like peak experience, right? It's akin to having this really momentous, special occasion that sometimes is talked about as like it just comes out of the blue. It's interesting. I'm thinking now how I described how Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche received the transmissions of the Shambhala teachings, right? Like that was something that all of a sudden just happened out of nowhere. And in fact, we know from doing this practice, that we can cultivate the conditions for insight to arise quite effortlessly. And in fact, I've had this conversation with some of you who are here, right? That like, there's a way that sometimes when we're practicing and we're in the early stages of shamatha, where it's akin to a waterfall of thoughts, and we can't see left or right, we can't make out what seems the right thing or the wrong thing to do, that actually returning over and over to our own presence vis-a-vis the breath or whatever the object is that insight becomes, because it is innate, it's not something that randomly happens to us. And it's also not something that we manipulate into happening. It can only arise, and it can only arise because it is our birthright. And in fact, the work probably around insight is not making it arise, but is trusting that we have that capacity. Which is why we're studying basic goodness, is why this whole topic is so important, because if we don't trust the basic goodness of our, our dignity and our worthiness and this clear, strong, stable, appreciative mind, if we're kind of like, yeah, that's for other people, not for me so much, then we'll have insights and we won't know them. We won't recognize them. Does that make sense? If I had a dime for every insight that passed me by the first 47 years of my life, I would buy you all a pint of your favorite ice cream.
I'd love to pick up right there at that, what we miss part. I was really appreciating just the invitation to slow into encounter with self in order to be able to be in encounter with others. And in the parable, I'm going to call it a parable, that you told about your son, whether it was made up or not, those moments of being incredulous about being triggered, not just the trigger, but the like, how am I so upset about this? Feels like juicy. And I'm very familiar with it. And I'm just wondering how this practice can bring something different to that experience than just stopping at incredulousness or staying in this kind of like, how could I not have known space, and just curious what you have to offer about kind of an invitation to awareness that might offer as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Yasmin. And I think that like it's so beautifully said, that notion of, because I immediately went back into that story of the incredulous, the where like incredulity comes in, or where another word I can think of is bewilderment, right? Like that I become so bewildered by my own reactivity or the way in which it touches something really raw for me. And what's so fascinating to me, I mean, this is actually per Jeffrey's, a little bit connected back to Jeffrey's question, but this notion of insight, like one of the other things that being, you know, in this practice for as long as I've been doing it, is that the mood swings don't last as long as they used to. And I think that it has a little bit to do with what you're pointing to, which is this notion of they used to last longer because I was blindsided. And so I was bewildered. And so I would be walking around in this kind of haze of emotional reactivity. I would be replaying storylines. I would just be kind of like saying to myself, how did this happen? Not knowing that I was actually perpetuating the very strong feelings that I was having. And in some senses, afraid of my own mind and afraid of my own, what my triggers were, like so worried that I would spin out of control, that I didn't actually allow myself to open with that sense of encountering with a warmth and a mercy, of like, oh yeah, I mean, that when that happened the other night and like he wouldn't get off the TV and I went upstairs and I shut the door. I guess you could say it was slammed it. He probably thought I slammed it. And then I went upstairs and there was a cushion and I like slammed the cushion on the bed. I was so angry. And then it was my meditation cushion. And I was horrified. And I was like, I'm sorry. I'm going to do all sorts of, prayers for you. And we'll get you back to being my good old meditation cushion. I'm so sorry. I threw you on the bed. Like, and there was just like, and it was, and so the humor, right? Then the humor, I think, of it was like, it was a little bit more ready for me to access it, even in that moment of just going off, of like, how embarrassing, right? And some of you have heard me tell the story of when my kids were younger and they were like, I thought you were supposed to be Buddhist. And that's a rabbit hole of shame to go down, right? But just that humor to be like, oh, sweetie, like you really are worried about him and you really care about him and you don't want to stay up and you don't, and like he's so into the NFL and I'm not, and we don't share that anymore. And we used to share different things. Like there's so many things, right? Like that's all of these concentric circles of encountering each other. All of that stuff is going into that moment. And as I said in the beginning, if I at least make it a practice daily to be like, well, can I just name a couple of the things that are like mini little triggers or mini little tender spots that might be kind of there, that when I get to the big tender spot or the big trigger, it's kind of, okay, yeah. Yep. You care a lot about that, and maybe take a little time out and see that rocking chair back there? That's there for a reason. Like go to your rocking chair, get some tea, and go back tomorrow sooner rather than later and say, Reese, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I slammed the door. It's also become a little bit easier to offer an apology and to feel into the productive, creative aspect of my own regret. So rather than remorse and spiraling, it's a healthy regret of like, oh yeah, that wasn't the reaction I want to have, but I can kind of see why maybe I did have that reaction. And wow, that was really silly that I threw my meditation cushion against the bed.
David, can you say something about why you think these particular, well, first of all, thank you so much. That was so cool and beautiful and very helpful for me. So I really appreciate it. And I look forward to watching this talk again. But can you say why you feel that these teachings, even though they come from a, we could say, a troubled lineage, and a lineage that's had so many problems, not just Shambhala, but the Vajrayana lineage, you know, the Vajrayana school of Buddhism in general, um, why they are still so powerful and are so precious and are so valuable, um, and not, um, you know, maybe shouldn't be thrown away because of the hurt, the violence, and the mistakes others have made, even with the teachings themselves,
Yeah.
or through themselves.
Yeah. Thank you, Shante. And, you know, I think I want to just acknowledge that I know that yourself and a number of us who are here today, right, like have actually spent a lot of time researching our own hearts on this question. So I want to just acknowledge the space of, like, you know, heartbreak and kind of, you know, anguish, but, you know, coupled with inspiration and coupled with like this is an orientation by which, once I heard these teachings, I could never go back, right? Like some people, you hear some people say, well, like the teacher or the teachings saved my life, right? Or it helped me to refine my life or rediscover my life. And I don't know what exactly that articulation was, but it was definitely true for me. Like there was a way in which I felt like I had a purpose. And it wasn't that I didn't feel like I had a purpose before. I had felt that in my activism and family, and, you know, even school to some degree, even scholarship, service, you know, places where I showed up to be of service to people. All of those places, there was certainly a quality or sense of purpose, but that why, that's what really changed things. The why of, you know, that basic goodness could be a lifelong exploration, and it could be my way into encountering myself and encountering others, that even in the midst of, you know, because I was an accomplice in that society, right? Like there are ways in which I, knowing to whatever degree of awareness that I had around my own position, around my own privilege, and around the way I was able to move into positions of leadership and power and all the rest of those things, the things that I ignored, right? The things that I cultivated, the things I cultivated out of a certain sense of self-interest, of wanting to be seen in the community, like all these very deeply human things that, when the shit hit the fan and the news came forward about these specific events that were just like, I was prone and laid out on the floor and couldn't get out of my bathtub for like 3 weeks. The way in which the most essential humanity of the teachings was at the same time shining through as brightly as ever. Like, of course, human being. Like, of course, the humanity of this is that these things are possible. And as much as I want to believe that they should just go away, and as much as I'm committed to undoing as many of these ills as I can, something that I could rely on that was like true, that was unwaveringly true, it was still there. Like, it didn't get shaken by anything that happened. And in fact, another thing was that, you know, my practice, particularly because of like what happened vis-a-vis my relationship to my teacher, and the idea that I over time, I realized I couldn't go back into a teacher-student relationship with that individual. Like, the practice become truly something that was like of my own heart. And so if the teachings can lead to that, then there's something, there is truly something untarnishably true, no matter how humans will try to tarnish that shit. And they will. Every type of confusion will be thrown at real wisdom. And that there was something, some way in which I could hold the truth of that was going to continue to happen. And I need to continue to show up with an awareness within myself of how I was contributing to that, or how to be an antidote in any small way. But the truth of the fact that that happens, along with something that it didn't change, it never wavered through that whole thing. That's why I think we're here, like, for the longest of hauls. Now, how the Shambhala teachings emanate, are propagated, are shared, are discussed, are deeply practiced on. You know, you and I, Shante, have talked about being in retreat. Like, it's important for us to be in this setting together, but also important to go more deeply with a full acknowledgement. Like, we finally get to that next level of acknowledging all the complexity that many people were frankly afraid to do earlier. And so that fear held in check systems of domination. So much fear around that. And then it was like, worst fear that you could experience, that's there. And the teachings are still true. They're still true. And only each one of us here tonight can know that in our own practice. You can hear me say that, but tonight, what I'm going to say as we close out this session is, you know, come back to class next week. Come back to each of these 8 series, rewatch them, watch them. If you can't be here live, watch the recordings. Work with the 3 questions and also the contemplation of the concentric circles, like how that might factor into your already existing practice. Like, you know, work with that a little bit in this next period of time. And we're going to give you practices and insights. What's so cool about this, friends, is that, you know, weekly Dharma gathering, we're taking the spirit of weekly Dharma gathering and we're threading a through line, because what Shante did in curating all the speakers for weekly Dharma gathering these past almost 3 years, that was the through line, right? Like, it was a Dharma that was relevant, that was needed, and that was really rooted in basic goodness. Every one of those speakers has their own and have had their own way of articulating and expressing basic goodness. And all we've done with this course is just make a through line, a very intentional through line with that. And so I want to say it's both like in support of everything that Ashley and Alex and Adriana and Shante have built. And now we're just bringing it a little bit further out. And I think that is really a gift that we are all so fortunate to be a part of. And I just, yeah, as I said before, encountering you all in this space there's nothing I'd rather be doing except for watching the NFL, but I can go do that later. All right. Does anyone have any parting words or might be really nice. I know we're right at time, but it might be really nice for if you all want to come off mute and if you all want to just like offer a word into the space so we can hear your voice and hear what that word is. And maybe that segues us into until the next we meet. So please share a word with us.
I just wanted to say thanks to you both. I think it's really generous of you not to walk away forever from Shambhala, but to hang in and come back and work with us. I'm just really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ainsley. Any other words that you'd like to offer?
I think I've just been really hungering for this kind of practice that has a more direct through line, and I'm just I'm feeling really satisfied that there's 8 weeks ahead of me of this, because it went from like frantically trying to get home on time and I'm in just like such a different space after 1 hour of gathering. So.
Great. So good. Well, we look forward to being with you more, Michelle. Thank you.
I just want to echo appreciations for gathering and space and curation and for humor. Yes.
Dr. Sai, so much love to you and your four-legged.
Hey, thank you so much, David. This was really great. I keep coming back to something you said at the beginning, which is that these teachings belong to all of us. And I really appreciate thinking about that in terms of the Shambhala teachings and not throwing that away. So thank you for that.
Yeah, good. I think Shantae said that, but anytime I can get credit for what Shantae says, like.
Thank you, Shantae, for saying that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll see everybody next week. Dr. Shantae Paradigm Smalls is leading next week's session 2 of the series. If you're a subscriber, they're all available to you. You can sign up for individual sessions in the series or the full series. Please follow the social channels for weekly Dharma gathering, Instagram and Facebook. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you so much, David and Shantae.